Absolutely Free by the Mothers of Invention has to be one of the most unique and creative albums of the late 1960s. Even compared to things like VU and Nico, Sgt. Pepper, Forever Changes, it still stands out so much. Alright, and so today I'm going to do the absolute best to tell you everything I can about this album, and to give it some of the respect it deserves, because I mean, for 1967, this is one hell of an album in my opinion. Alright, so let's start at the beginning. This album was originally released in 1967 and is the Mothers of Invention's second album. I want to quickly talk about this album in comparisons to its predecessor, Freak Out. Freak Out is how the Mothers wanted to present themselves in the marketplace to begin with in 1966. Frank Zappa had a lot of unique stuff obviously going on. Even in his first album, it was really interesting obviously for the time. But Freak Out, at least compared to anything else afterwards, is still by far the most accessible album of all the Mothers albums, and maybe even out of all of Frank Zappa's discography in general. That's not to say it doesn't have any experimentation going on, because it definitely does. I mean, if you've listened to this album, and anybody who listened to this album in 1966 literally thought these guys were just a bunch of stoners, and I mean, they were half right. I mean, Frank wasn't, but the rest of the guys pretty much were. Regardless, though, my point with this comparison was to show you that Freak Out was basically just a presentation. It's basically saying, this isn't really what we are, but we're here. Where Zappa and the Mothers really started showing who they were was in their next couple of albums, like We're Only in Them for the Money, Absolutely Free, Uncle Meat, Burnt Weenie Sandwich, the list goes on and on. And Absolutely Free was the first of these albums where the Mothers really started to show who they were. And so let's start with what this album is actually built upon. This album is built upon basically tight-knit compositions that make it sound like you're listening to one piece of music rather than multiple songs. This is also the first album where we can really see Frank Zappa's ability to compose music. We did see it in Freak Out, but I think this is where we really see his ability and his true capabilities, at least when composing music. And this is what we would also see later on with releases like Burnt Weenie Sandwich, Uncle Meat, the list goes on and on really. Another thing we can clearly see in this album, or rather here I guess, is that the sound has completely evolved from Freak Out. It's no longer a psych pop sound, it's more of an experimental pop, avant-garde, or experimental rock sound that is just so unique. And for 1967, this has got to be one of the most unique and creative albums, definitely, of the year. One thing this album did keep from its predecessor was its satirical themes, like making fun of politics, making fun of American society, etc. The opening track, Plastic People, basically makes fun of consumerism and people who are materialistic. During the song, Zappa addresses the listener and asks, "Go home and check yourself, you think we're singing about someone else." Basically saying that he thinks that those people are so stupid that it'll go over their heads and they'll think that they're talking about somebody else, so yeah. The song also features a jab at Lyndon B. Johnson with the chicken soup gag, so yeah. Another example of the satire would be Brown Shoes Don't Make It. First of all, let me just say, what a masterpiece of a song. Beautiful. The composition, out of this world, man. Frank Zappa was insane. But yeah, basically, the satire in this one resides in conformists. Basically, Zappa makes fun of people in the 1960s who wanted to conform to American society, and pointed out that they were, well, basically dead inside. Along with that, Zappa also makes fun of lawmakers. And there is another part of the song that I could very well talk about. I'm not gonna talk about that part here because I kind of don't want this video to be blocked by YouTube, but just search up the lyrics to Brown Shoes and the meaning. You'll see. You'll find out easily. The satire obviously does nowhere near end there. I mean, it's Frank Zappa, come on. Did you really think it was gonna end there? But yeah, no, he continues the satire with the song Status Back Baby. And in this one, he basically makes fun of teenagers this time around, and basically makes fun of them in the way that's saying if they lose their status in high school, it'll be the end of the world for them. So, yeah. Another cool thing about this album is the sort of return of Susie Cream Cheese, mentioned once in Son of the Monster Magnet on Freak Out, and on the back of the album cover on Freak Out as well. We would also see her in We're Only in It for the Money, Uncle Meat, and a couple other Frank Zappa releases as well. But yeah, in this one she gets her own song, so pretty cool. Alright, so we talked about the satire, the composition, all that good stuff. I want to talk about the musicianship, because honestly, everybody in this band was incredibly talented. Obviously we give credit to Frank Zappa for composing and guitar, and we obviously should. But the rest of these guys were really talented. Frank Zappa always said that he chose people that he knew could play the music that he wanted to play, because the music he wanted to play was really complex, and so he needed people that could play that music correctly. Don Preston, Jimmy Carl Black, all these other guys could genuinely play music, and it shows, not only on this album, but on a lot of other Frank Zappa albums. Their musicianship shows everywhere, and it's insane. This album and many, many, many others would have never been possible without them. So, while we thank Frank Zappa, as we should, let's also thank the other guys, because none of these things would have ever been possible without them. But yeah, I think that's all for me. I blabbled long enough about this album. I said a lot of good things about it, obviously. So, yeah, if you haven't listened to this album, go listen to it. A fair warning, to be fair, though, this album definitely takes some time to get into. I know when I first listened to this, I am going to be honest with you, I didn't like this album when I first listened to it, but it grew on me after about, maybe 8 listens. But, and if you have listened to this album, tell me what you think about it below in the comments, and, yeah, I think that's all for me, so, see you later, and peace.